an NCTC commission. It came out of a conversation that I'd had with Ed Decker some time ago about wanting to write a play about queer friendship in particular. And it's ended up being a play of 5 women and women of color, and kind of for me came from that place of just wanting to hear women talk on stage.
So I really loved the constellation of people that you focused on in the play, and just like the different generations represented, and the sort of Americans, and then the Parisians, and just the cultural differences that were illuminated there. I'm wondering if there was like a specific inspiration, like what was your specific inspiration for setting the play in this place, or focusing on these people in particular?
Yeah, it's kind of hard. I don't know if you find this, but it's kind of hard to talk about. It's very rare for me that the inspiration is singular and it's one thing, and it sort of is. The word constellation is so beautiful. It just does feel like a series of disparate things coming together, and for whatever reason this becomes the container. Or the play becomes the container for that exploration. And I'd love to hear a bit more about how you ended up with the characters that you did as well in your play. And for me, it was came from a response to this writer, this essayist named Maggie Nelson, who writes kind of primarily nonfiction. She has a book called The Argonauts, which is about her wife transitioning, and before that she had a book called Bluets, which is like a little meditation on the color blue. Like all the different, she had this grant and she went searching for all the disparate like kinds of blue and where they were found all over the world. And it's also like this meditation on being blue, being sad, and I was really drawn to that work, and that there was some power in like the fragment, in just getting these small kind of distilled pieces that were sort of meditative, and I kind of wanted to see whether that could be possible on stage. And so that was kind of one piece of it. So there were kind of these voices before they were characters, and I was drawn to kind of this image of a woman alone in a cafe, and that was kind of another piece of it. It was, what does it mean to exist? What does it mean to exist by yourself? What does can women are so rarely seen out, out of their contexts as wives and sisters and mothers, and those are the archetypes that we see most. And what happens when you're not in any of those archetypes? Like, what is that image? And I kind of wanted to use the play to explore that.
Yeah,
and that answers your question exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I loved how you sort of refracted our expectations and assumptions about those archetypes in the piece. And explored them, and sort of were intentional about exploring that there.
Yeah, and that conversation feels by necessity an intergenerational one to me. Like it is it's in the contrast between what that is to ask that question when you're 20 versus to ask it when you're 50. Like it's a very different thing when you've had life behind you, and I wanted to create that contrast with these characters. But I think this piece in particular was very visually kind of motivated. Like I could kind of feel the spaces that were in this sort of abstracted version of Paris, that it's Paris, but it's also not. It's sort of what it feels like you would think Paris to be. Like there's so many layers of like, we project so much when we travel. I think that was sort of part of it. It's sort of their projections of what Paris is and what that means emotionally. And so I had a sense of like stage architecture, I think, even before I did time. Like I knew there were liminal spaces that were going to kind of speak to the play, and there's a lot of light kind of stage light that was for me the engine of the play in a strange way. Like I kind of tonally, I guess another way to say it is kind of, I had all of that information before I did chronology. And then I had a friend read it. My friend Matt Schatz read it, and he was like, "Oh, this is a really gentle Quentin Tarantino. This is a really gentle Pulp Fiction." And I was like, but it does do the back and forth that Pulp Fiction does. It's a strange, that was a strange thing that happened, but it wasn't intentional. But I think the condensed amount of time, it's only really a couple of days, that kind of for me helped kind of shape the story.
Awesome. Yeah. And what was behind choosing specifically the location of Paris? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, I've lived in America now for 15 years. I was raised in India, and then in Russia briefly, and then in the UK before I moved to the United States. And so I have kind of a constant sort of cultural conversation that's happening in my brain and in my heart. And Isabel Allende uses the word emotional jet lag, which I really love, but that is what time feels like to me, that I'm always kind of in the wrong place. And there is a lot of displacement in this play in lots of ways. Like everyone is constantly kind of feeling like they're not where they should be, and there's a literal displacement in that they miss each other. That is also part of the dramaturgy of this play, is of people kind of the misconnections sort of trope. But so I think I'm sort of this very harsh divide in the US of public and private is something that interests me a lot, and I was sort of interested as Paris as a container for where that's not true, or building a space where that's not so true, and where you're where it's much more porous, and where it's permissible to weep on the streets. Where these are people who feel a lot, and I kind of just wanted to make a space where it was possible to feel, and to feel publicly, and to where equally you can speak to a stranger like you know them deeply, but you're kind of matter of fact about things which in the United States you probably wouldn't tell your best friend, like about kind of deeply held sort of fears and truths which happen very casually in conversation in the play. So that was sort of why Paris.
But how did you get your start playwriting? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many answers to this question, and so many types of ways to talk about it. But I think essentially I fell in love with theater before I knew what was happening. I was so young. I think I was like maybe 2 or 3, and we were in England, and I didn't speak the language. I didn't speak English, and I think it was talking about safe spaces. It was a safe space in a really unsafe, what felt like a really unsafe time. And what was England in the early 90s was like really racist place. And it, I think I couldn't say all of that as like a 4 or 5 year old. I didn't understand fully what was happening, but I knew that I didn't feel good. I felt really kind of scared a lot of the time. And I think I probably didn't feel that when I was on stage and in a sheep costume or whatever, like a tree. Felt really good. And I felt both visible and invisible at the same time. And I think that is something that drew me to theater, and I didn't know what or how. And then a little bit later, when we moved back to India, I was maybe 7 or 8 when I was writing things and making the other kids be in them and staging them, like in my parents, like in the balcony, and we had this tiny little balcony, and make kids do things and then charge their parents to see them. So I think
Yes,
it was like
capitalism.
capitalism, little entrepreneur. It never, that instinct completely died. I have
Sure,
no
yeah.
money sense now.
No.
But yeah, it was always there. I don't know. And I think it took me a long time to be like, oh no, this is it. You're stuck with this. I think everyone was hoping, as you know, no artists in my family, everyone was hoping, and education is so important. I probably my parents, everybody was hoping that, and I was hoping I would do something more sensible for a really long time, and it just didn't happen. And I think I was probably 23 when I was 22, 23, when I was like, oh no, this is it. And you have to admit this to yourself. And like, what does that mean? It means, for me, it meant letting go of all safety nets. I did the whole leap and the net will appear thing as a really dumb young person. I was, but I was deeply serious about the I think about playwriting as vocational, you know, and that like that there was like a vow that I made at that point, with wholehearted sincerity, that was it. And I didn't know what that meant, but and there's been a lot of like, you're so vulnerable in this profession because you're constantly, you know, putting things that you like on paper and then having them rejected at various levels, and it, for the most part, that is part of it. And you know, also like health insurance and like the basics, and you know, how you're going to make your playwriting doesn't pay. And I think I had to make peace with all of that, which is something that happened when I was like, I know I'm really serious about this. And it happened, I took my first, I think, real playwriting class probably when I was 23. And it was with a playwright named Sam Marks, who was a student of Paula Vogel. And it was Sam's pedagogy that was really, really deeply inclusive. It was, here are all the options formally, and now you make it work for you. So there was, because I think I had bucked against the well-made play for reasons that it just didn't match, as you were talking about, with my life experience, which was so kind of weird and intersectional in so many ways. It just didn't work. And that was the first time someone said, well, you can hear the elements that make up a play, and now you can put them together in a way that makes sense to you. And he was the first person who told me that was possible. And we did a lot of fantastic reading in that class. Irene Fornez and Sarah Rule, and you know, everybody, Beckett, I don't know, everyone. And then that led me to be a student of Paula Vogel. Sam was a student of Paula's, and I wrote my first play that year, which I sent to grad school on his encouragement. And I went to Brown first, and then Yale to study with her. And she really was instrumental to me kind of writing, but also continuing to write. She had worked really hard to make sure those programs were free. So I came out of grad school not because I knew I couldn't go into grad school and come out in debt. Like, I just knew that it would devastate my like the pressure would be too much, because I didn't know if I was any good. Like, I just didn't know. Like, I hadn't written enough. In my head, you had to like write a lot to be sure that you were half decent at it. And I was like, I don't know. So it took a long time. And then the I don't know, it turns out, doesn't go away. It's
yeah,
like,
right, exactly.